My name is Rachel Rodriguez, and I'm 26 years old. For a long time, I thought I had everything figured out. A job. I worked hard for a house I was proud of, and a boyfriend I trusted with every part of me. His name was Chris. We'd been together for 4 years, and I used to believe love was about patience and understanding. That belief ended one Tuesday night. Chris was sitting on our beige couch, scrolling through his phone while I stirred pasta sauce. The kitchen smelled like basil and garlic, comforting familiar, but the air between us was heavy. He kept sighing and shaking his head, his thumb flicking across the glass screen, like he was trying to swipe his way out of our life. "Rachel," he said suddenly, voice flat. "Look at this." He held his phone toward me. On the screen was a photo of an influencer couple laughing over champagne at some rooftop restaurant. The city lights blurred behind them like a painting. "Why can't we do stuff like this?" he asked. I smiled softly, though something in me tensed. "We could if you want. Maybe this weekend. That new Italian place downtown just opened." He rolled his eyes. "Rachel, that place has paper napkins." The way he said it, disgusted like our entire existence, was wrapped in cheap napkins, and thrift store dishes stung more than I wanted to admit. I turned back to the sauce, watching it bubble. "We don't need fancy restaurants to have fun," I said quietly. "I like our dinners here." "That's exactly the problem," he snapped. "You think small." The words sliced through the kitchen noise. I froze. What's that supposed to mean? "It means you're satisfied with small things. Safe choices, easy routines, the same job, the same dinners, the same weekends." He gestured around like our home offended him. "This life, it's so basic, Rachel. Don't you ever want more?" "I thought we wanted the same things," I murmured. He laughed bitterly. "That's the issue. You thought." For a moment, I just stood there, feeling my heartbeat rise like something trapped under glass. He'd been coming home later for months. He'd started wearing new cologne, expensive Sharp. He brushed off questions with half smiles. It's just stuff he'd say. I'd wanted to believe him, but now the cracks were too wide to ignore. "Chris," I said softly, "are you unhappy?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I'm 26, Rachel, and I feel like I'm living like I'm 60. Do you know what that feels like? Watching everyone else live while we sit here eating leftovers and pretending that's enough?" I looked at him. Really looked. The man who used to surprise me with movie nights and handwritten notes was gone. In his place was someone restless, chasing something he couldn't even name. Enough for who I asked. "Because it's been enough for me." "That's just it," he said, raising his voice. "You're fine with average. I can't do average anymore." He paced the living room, the reflection of his phone lighting his face. The shadows made him look older harder. I whispered, "So what do you want?" He stopped pacing. "Better. I deserve better than this." That silence afterward was the loudest sound I've ever heard. I watched him disappear down the hall toward our bedroom, muttering something about needing space. My eyes landed on the half-finished dinner, the sauce still simmering, the pasta growing cold. Everything we built together suddenly looked small the way he said. Not because it was, but because he wanted me to see it that way. I turned off the stove, leaned against the counter, and stared at the empty doorway. My chest felt hollow, like the house itself had been scooped out. That night I didn't cry. I just lay in bed listening to the clock tick, every second reminding me that the life I loved was slipping through my fingers, while the person beside me, my person, had already let go. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee, but not from the kitchen. It was coming from his travel mug, half full, sitting on the counter beside his suitcase. He was wearing one of his sharpest shirts, the kind he used to save for presentations. When he looked at me, there was no warmth left. "I'm leaving for a few days," he said. "Where?" "Don't do that," he muttered. "Don't make this dramatic. Chris, you said you needed space, not space is what I'm taking." He zipped his suitcase shut. My voice trembled for the first time. "Is there someone else?" He hesitated, just a blink, but that pause said everything. "It's not about that," he said quickly. "It's about me. I need to figure out what I want." "Then why does what you want look like someone else's life?" He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up his keys, gave a tired sigh, and said, "Rachel, don't make this harder than it needs to be." And just like that, he walked out. When the door clicked shut, the silence was deafening. I sat on the couch where he'd scrolled through those pictures, phone still lying there face down. I picked it up, stared at the lock screen, the two of us smiling at the beach last summer. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I didn't press it. Not yet. I made myself coffee black, strong, bitter. I drank it standing at the counter, staring at the empty space where his suitcase had been. People think heartbreak comes with tears, but sometimes it comes quietly disguised as calm. You don't scream or throw things, you just breathe differently, shallower, careful, like your lungs don't want to wake the pain sleeping inside you. That morning, I got ready for work like nothing had happened. Same makeup, same ponytail, same cardigan, he once said made me look comfortably cute. But when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the same woman. Something small had shifted. Maybe it was the way I stood, or maybe it was the realization that loving someone doesn't mean standing still while they outgrow you. As I locked the front door, I glanced back at the kitchen window. The morning sun hit the countertop, lighting up the cold pot of pasta I never finished. For the first time, I whispered to myself, not to him, I deserve better too. When I woke up the next morning, the side of the bed where Chris used to sleep was cold. The space smelled faintly of his cologne, that new one he'd started wearing when the late nights began. It used to make my heart race. Now it made my stomach twist. I walked to the kitchen, half expecting him to walk in with that sheepish smile he wore whenever we fought. But instead, I found him there already. Not smiling, not sheepish. He was standing by the counter, sipping coffee, and beside him sat a suitcase. "Morning," I said softly. He didn't look up. "Morning." There was a pause long enough for my throat to tighten. "You're really going?" He exhaled through his nose like the question annoyed him. "Rachel, we've been over this. I just need time to clear my head." "Clear your head," I repeated, "or clear me out of it." He frowned. "Don't twist things." "I'm not twisting anything," I said, voice trembling despite myself. "You made it clear last night. You think our life is small, that I'm small." "Stop!" he snapped, finally looking at me. "I never said you're small. You said everything we built is mediocre," I replied. "What's the difference?" He didn't answer, just rubbed his temples and sighed like he was exhausted by me, by all of it. Then he said the words that still echo in my mind. "I just need more than this, Rachel. More than dinners in and safe plans. More than comfort." "More," I whispered. "And where exactly do you plan to find that?" Right on cue, a car horn honked outside. Chris flinched slightly, the kind of startled movement that reveals guilt before words do. He grabbed his jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and muttered, "That's my ride." I walked to the window. Parked at the curb was a glossy white BMW engine, humming. Behind the wheel sat Vanessa, a woman I'd met once at his company's networking event. She was confident, sharp, the kind of woman who made every room bend around her presence. When she saw me through the window, she smiled, not kindly. My mouth went dry. "Vanessa!" Chris hesitated, then forced a shrug. "She's giving me a place to stay for a while." "Oh," I said. "So this isn't about space, it's about replacement." "Don't make this ugly," he muttered. I laughed once, short, bitter. "It already is." He started gathering things from the counter key's phone charger, his watch. I watched his movements, memorizing them, realizing that I didn't recognize him anymore. The man who used to help me paint this kitchen, who held me when my dad died, was now moving through our home like a stranger checking out of a hotel. As he reached for this door, I said quietly, "Chris, if you walk out right now, you don't get to come back pretending this was confusion or a phase. You're not lost. You're leaving." He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "You'll understand one day," he said, "when you finally want more for yourself." And then he left. I don't remember how long I stood there after the door closed. The sound of that car pulling away was louder than any fight we ever had. Eventually, I went to the bedroom. The closet door was open, half the hangers empty. His scent still clung to the clothes he'd left behind, the old hoodie I'd stolen from him, the faded jeans he wore on lazy Sundays. I picked up the hoodie and pressed it to my face, not because I missed him, but because I wanted to remind myself how final this felt. In the kitchen, his coffee mug was still half full. The steam had faded, but the ring it left on the counter was perfect, circular, complete. Just like him, leaving traces, but no warmth. I sat at the table and stared at my reflection in the dark coffee. My mind was strangely still. Not the kind of stillness that comes from peace, but the one that comes after an earthquake, when everything's fallen, and there's nothing left to do but look at the ruins. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from my coworker. "Just saw Chris on Vanessa's story. Paris brunch theme. You okay?" I turned off my phone. Days passed in slow motion. I went to work, answered emails, smiled when people asked if I was okay. Yeah, I'd say just tired. But every night when I came home to the quiet house, I felt the echo of his absence, like a bruise I couldn't stop pressing. His toothbrush was still in the holder, his slippers by the bed. The smallest things hurt the most, the empty space on the couch where he used to rest his hand on my knee during movies. Yet underneath all that ache, something unexpected began to grow relief. Relief that I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore, guessing which version of him would come home. Relief that I could finally breathe without feeling guilty for being content. I cleaned the house, really cleaned it, boxed up his leftover things, vacuumed under the couch, repainted the scuffed wall in the hallway. I didn't cry once. It felt like I was erasing the noise he'd left behind. When I finished, I lit a candle and sat in the silence. It was beautiful. A week later, I ran into one of his coworkers, Adam, at the grocery store. He was polite but uneasy. After a bit of small talk, he sighed. Look, Rachel, I probably shouldn't say this, but Chris has been bragging about some new crypto startup with Vanessa. Big money, fast cars, the whole thing. He says he's finally living the life he deserves. I forced a smile. Good for him. Adam nodded, awkward. He's different now. The way he talks like he's in a movie or something. When he left, I stood there in the aisle, surrounded by cereal boxes and fluorescent lights, trying not to laugh. Different now. Of course he was. People always change when they think they've upgraded. That night, I scrolled through social media for the first time since he left. There he was, laughing beside Vanessa on a yacht, glasses of champagne in hand, captioned, "Finally living." I looked at that picture for a long time, and then I whispered, "So was I." You just never noticed. 2 weeks later, a new noise filled the house. Not silence, not pain music. I opened the windows, let sunlight flood the rooms, and started cooking again. Real meals, not the ones I used to make trying to impress him. Food that smelled like home, like me. And when the phone rang one morning, an unknown number flashing on the screen, I ignored it. Later, I found a voicemail, his voice slightly slurred. "Hey Rachel, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. Maybe we can talk sometime." I deleted it without listening twice because I finally understood something. He didn't leave for Vanessa. He left chasing a version of himself he thought existed only in someone else's mirror. And I wasn't going to wait for him to realize mirrors break too. It's strange how quiet becomes its own kind of companion. The first few weeks after Chris left, I hated it. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum from the refrigerator felt like a reminder that the house had too much space and too few voices. But somewhere along the line, that quiet started to feel clean, honest, like the air after a storm. I kept the house just as it was, but I changed the rules. Music played when I cooked, now old love songs, piano instrumentals. Even the upbeat playlists I used to turn off because he said they were too sentimental. I cooked whatever I wanted, not worrying about presentation or whether the meal looked worthy of a post. Sometimes I ate straight from the pan, standing barefoot in the kitchen, and laughed to myself at how good freedom tasted. One Sunday, I woke early, sunlight streaming through the blinds, and decided to fix the loose cabinet hinge Chris had promised to repair for months. I opened the toolbox, something he'd always guarded like it was sacred. I took the screwdriver, tightened the screws, and smiled when the door finally stopped squeaking. For some reason, that tiny sound click felt louder than all his apologies ever had. At work, people were still cautious around me, like grief was contagious. My coworker Charles, the quiet analyst who sat 2 desks away, was the first one to treat me normally again. He didn't ask about Chris. He just showed up one morning with coffee and said, "You look like someone who needed caffeine, not sympathy." I laughed. That's probably the nicest thing anyone said to me in months. We started having lunch together. Not dates, not at first, just sandwiches on the office terrace, sharing random thoughts about movies or travel dreams. He had this calm energy, the kind that didn't fill silences, but made them comfortable. One afternoon, he noticed the small camera charm on my keychain. "You take photos, used to," I said. Stopped when someone told me it was a waste of time. He raised an eyebrow. "Then you were listening to the wrong person." That night, I went home, dug through the closet, and found my old DSLR camera, dusty but intact. I charged it, stepped outside, and walked until the streetlights came on. I took photos of puddles, old houses, stray cats, everything I'd ignored when I was too busy trying to meet Chris's definition of better. The pictures weren't perfect. Some were blurry, some off-centered, but they were mine. A few weeks later, I got promoted. Not because I was chasing it, but because I'd finally stopped doubting myself. My boss said something that stuck with me. "You seem lighter these days, more decisive." That night, I celebrated alone. Cooked pasta again, just like the night everything fell apart. Same sauce, same ingredients. Except this time, I stirred it slowly, savoring the smell, instead of associating it with a fight. I poured a glass of wine, turned on soft music, and whispered to myself, here's to mediocre miracles. Because that's what my life had become, a collection of small, quiet victories that no one else saw but me. Of course, people talked. They always do. Jess from work told me she ran into one of Chris's friends at a networking event. Apparently, he and Vanessa are living big, she said, half rolling her eyes. Cars, trips, champagne, the usual fairy tale before taxes and lawyers show up. I laughed. Good for them. You don't even stalk his socials, she asked, genuinely surprised. I shrugged. Why would I? I was there when he started living for photos instead of moments. She smiled at that. You're handling this better than anyone expected. I didn't tell her that sometimes I still woke up in the middle of the night, reaching instinctively for the other side of the bed. Healing isn't glamorous. It's messy, repetitive, and full of phantom habits. But every time I remembered that night, him standing at the door, suitcase in hand, I reminded myself he left to find better. I stayed to become better. Charles started coming over on weekends at first to help with house projects, then just to hang out. One Saturday, he brought over a small potted plant. It's for your window, he said. Every house deserves a little green. I placed it on the kitchen sill, where the sunlight hit perfectly. What's its name? I asked jokingly. He grinned. You name it. You're the one it'll listen to. I named it Grace, not after anyone, but after the thing I finally felt growing inside me again. Over time, our friendship became something softer, deeper. Not fireworks, just a slow, steady warmth that made me forget how cold things had been. One night, while washing dishes, he asked, Do you ever think about what you'd say to him if you saw him again? I thought for a moment. I'd say thank you. He looked surprised. Thank you? Yeah, I said, smiling faintly for leaving. It taught me how to stay with myself. Spring came early that year. The air smelled like rain and change. I started hanging my photos on the living room wall. Sunset, city lights, small glimpses of life that felt real. One evening, I stepped back, looked at the display, and realized I'd turned the house that once held so much silence into a gallery of resilience. That same week, Charles asked if I wanted to join him on a photography trip to the mountains. Just a weekend, he said. No Wi-Fi, no noise. You could use some fresh air. I hesitated. You're sure you want my kind of quiet? He smiled. Your kind of quiet is exactly what I need. That night, as I packed my camera bag, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the one who'd begged someone to stay. She was softer around the edges, but steadier, her eyes clearer. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval to feel alive. And somewhere deep down, I knew that the house of one wasn't lonely anymore. It was home. It had been almost 4 months since Chris left. By then, I'd stopped counting days. My mornings were peaceful again. Coffee by the window, soft music, and sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor where his suitcase once stood. Charles and I talked almost every evening, sometimes about work, sometimes about nothing. It felt natural, unforced. Then one Thursday night, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. Rachel, it's me! I stared at the message for a full minute before my brain caught up to the reality that me was Chris. Another message followed. I need to talk to you, please. I didn't reply. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. It wasn't anger that held me still, it was disbelief. The kind that feels like déjà vu from a dream you didn't want to revisit. 5 minutes later, another text. Something happened. Please just pick up. I turned off my phone and left it face down on the table. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily, wondering what game he was playing now. Guilt, nostalgia, or was this just the next chapter in his pattern of chaos? By morning, there were 6 missed calls and 2 voicemails. His voice in the recording sounded unfamiliar, rushed, scared even. But I didn't listen to them in full. I deleted both. A few days later, I was having lunch with Charles. He noticed me checking my phone and asked, Something wrong, I hesitated. He's been trying to reach me, Charles's brow furrowed. Chris? I nodded. Random texts, late-night calls. I keep blocking the numbers, but he just finds new ones. Do you think he's in trouble? I think he's always in trouble, I said. Then after a pause, but he's not my problem anymore. Charles studied me quietly. You don't have to prove you're strong, you know. I'm not proving anything. I'm just done saving people who wouldn't save me. He nodded. He didn't push. That's what I liked about him. He understood the power of silence. The calls kept coming. Some nights, I'd wake up to the vibration on my nightstand, see his name, and feel that old reflex, the urge to pick up to ask if he was okay. But each time I stopped myself. Because the truth was, I did care once. I cared enough to hold our world together while he tore it apart. But care and rescue aren't the same thing. By the third week, even his sister reached out. She called on a Sunday afternoon, her voice frantic. "Rachel, please don't hang up. I know you don't owe him anything but Chris's. He's in a bad situation." I kept my voice steady. "What kind of situation?" She hesitated. "He got involved with some kind of investment thing with Vanessa. It's gone wrong. There are lawsuits, debts, people threatening him. He's desperate." I took a slow breath. "I'm sorry to hear that. Please, Rachel, he's saying you're the only one he trusts." That made me laugh, not cruelly, just softly. "Trust. He left me because I wasn't ambitious enough, remember?" She sighed, frustrated. "Everyone makes mistakes. You have all people should understand that." "I do," I said. "But understanding doesn't mean forgetting. So you're just going to abandon him?" She said, voice rising. "Abandonment implies he was here," I replied. "He left a long time ago." The silence on the other end was long. Then she muttered, "You've changed." "Yes," I said, and hung up. A week later, it happened. I was cooking dinner with Charles, grilled fish and vegetables, the kind of meal that fills the house with warmth. We were laughing about something when my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me, maybe closure, made me answer. A robotic voice came first. "You have a collect call from Chris Tranack County Detention Center. Will you accept the charges?" I froze. Charles looked at me confused. "Who is it?" I mouthed, "Chris." Then I pressed one to accept. The moment I heard his voice, time folded in on itself. "Rachel." "Oh, thank God you answered. I'm in jail." I stayed quiet. The only sound was the faint clatter of utensils in the sink behind me. "Rachel, are you there?" "I'm here," I said finally. He let out a shaky breath. "Listen, it's not what it looks like. Vanessa, she dragged me into this thing with her crypto investors. I didn't know it was a scam. They're saying I helped defraud people, but I swear I didn't." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Why are you calling me because I need help? I need bail money. How much? 50,000. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Chris, if I had 50,000 lying around, I'd spend it on peace of mind, not your bail." He groaned. "You could take out a loan or look, please. I know I hurt you. I know I said awful things, but I'm begging you. You're the only one who'd even pick up." I didn't pick up, I said. I accepted a collect call. "Rachel, don't do this, please." His voice cracked. "You know I'm not a bad person." I looked around my kitchen, the same one where he once called our life mediocre. The same counters I'd repainted, the same walls I'd healed under. "You're not bad," I said, "just selfish." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you only call when you need something. Love, forgiveness, or $50,000. It's always the same currency, me paying the cost." He was quiet for a long time. Then a small, broken whisper. "I made a mistake." "No," I said softly, "you made a choice. Rachel, please, don't hang up. You're not like this. You're kind. You always cared. I still care." I interrupted, but not enough to drown again. And then I hung up. For a moment, I stood there, phone still in my hand, staring at the wall. My heart was pounding, not from sadness, from relief. Charles placed a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah," I said, exhaling slowly. "I finally am." The smell of dinner filled the air again, and for the first time since Chris's name appeared on my screen, I smiled. Because it wasn't cruelty that kept me from saving him. It was clarity. He'd called me from a cell, but I realized I'd already served my sentence long ago, loving someone who couldn't love without conditions. Now I was free. 6 months later, I was standing in the same kitchen where Chris once told me he deserved better. Only now, it didn't feel like a battlefield. The counters gleamed. The air smelled faintly of jasmine tea, and laughter drifted in from the dining room, mine and Charles's. He was plating dinner, humming off-key, wearing the apron I'd bought at a flea market. The food wasn't fancy roasted vegetables, rice, and pan-seared fish, but there was something sacred about it, the kind of piece that doesn't need a caption. "Do you ever get tired of me cooking the same thing?" I asked. Charles grinned. "You kidding, mediocrity's my favorite flavor." We both laughed. That word mediocre once felt like a knife. Now it was a badge of quiet victory. After dinner, we sat by the open window, sipping tea, while the city lights blinked in the distance. I looked around at everything Chris once mocked: the secondhand furniture, the mismatched mugs, the photos I'd taken hanging on the wall. He saw dullness. I saw a map of everything I'd rebuilt. A week earlier, a mutual friend from Chris's company had texted me a link to a local news article. I didn't open it right away. When I finally did, the headline said it all. Crypto entrepreneur sentenced for defrauding investors. Former partner claims innocence. The photo beneath showed Chris in a wrinkled suit, face, pale eyes hollow. The story said he'd taken a plea deal, 18 months probation, community service, partial restitution. Vanessa had vanished overseas months ago. I didn't feel joy, not even anger, just stillness. Because the truth is, when someone who broke you finally breaks themselves, there's no satisfaction in watching, just quiet closure. That night, after Charles fell asleep, I sat by the window and let my mind wander back to the past. To the girl I was 26, stirring pasta sauce, hoping love would be enough. She was so desperate to hold on to something that was already leaving, so willing to shrink herself to fit his dreams. And yet, she survived, I whispered into the dark. You did good, Rachel. For once, it didn't feel strange talking to myself because it wasn't the same voice anymore. The one in my head used to sound like apology. Now it sounded like peace. A few days later, I ran into Jess from work at the farmer's market. She held up a bunch of fresh tulips. For your table, she said. Charles told me you're redecorating again. I smiled. I guess I am. Little things. She hesitated before asking, Did you ever talk to him again, Chris? Yeah, I mean, after everything. I shook my head. No, some conversations end without words. Jess nodded slowly. You're stronger than I'd be. I looked down at the tulips, their colors vibrant under the morning sun. Strength isn't the word, it's acceptance. At some point, you stop wishing they'd change and start realizing you already did. That evening, Charles and I sat on the floor, going through a stack of printed photos for an exhibit he'd convinced me to submit to. This one, he said, holding up a picture of sunlight streaming through the window onto the plant he'd given me months ago, Grace. It had grown leaves stretching toward the light. It's perfect, he said. It's you, I smiled. Funny, it's just a plant. He looked at me. No, it's proof. Of what? That peace can grow in the same place pain once lived. Something about that made my throat tighten, because he was right. Later that night, when Charles went to bed, I sat at my desk and began writing, not for anyone, just for myself, about love loss and all the quiet ways a person can rebuild without realizing it. I wrote, some people will always chase the next upgrade, the car, the trip, the partner who looks better in photos. But the truth is, happiness isn't louder at the top. It's quieter in the places where you finally stop running. I paused, tapping the pen against the page. Chris said I lived like I was 60. Maybe I did. Because peace, routine, and knowing who you are, that's not mediocrity. That's maturity. The next morning, I opened the window to let in the cool air. Across the street, a couple was arguing near their car, loud, passionate, the kind of scene I used to think meant love. Now it just looked exhausting. I turned back to the stove, flipped the pancakes, and smiled when I realized how light my heart felt. Charles walked in, hair messy, sleepy-eyed. You're up early, he said. Yeah, I was writing. About us, about peace, I said, and about how sometimes the life someone calls mediocre is exactly what another person prays for. He kissed my forehead and whispered, Then don't change a thing. That night, I lit a candle and scrolled through old photos on my camera, the ones I'd taken right after Chris left. They weren't perfect. The lighting was uneven, the focus soft, but they were raw, real. And in one of them, I saw myself reflected in the window glass, tired eyes, messy hair, holding the camera like it was the last thing tethering me to the world. I smiled at her, 'cause she had no idea that peace was coming. I still think about him sometimes, not with love or bitterness, but with a strange gratitude. Because without that ending, I might never have built this beginning. He wanted better than the life we had, and he was right. We both deserve better. He just didn't realize better wasn't gold-lit nights and fast cars. It was mornings like this, slow, safe, honest. The kind of life you don't have to photograph to remember. The kind of love that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. The kind of peace that used to sound like boredom to him, but to me now sounds like freedom.